They said the CEO was crazy for marrying a black woman with 5 kids, but nobody knew the truth behind that choice. Everyone laughed at him, mocked him, said he ruined his future, until one quiet moment in that crowded house changed everything. Because one of those kids, the shy little boy who barely spoke, carried a secret that could flip the whole world upside down. While the CEO fought to protect the family everyone else rejected, a powerful company moved in the shadows to steal the one thing that could save millions of lives. And when the truth finally came out, the same people who dragged this family through the mud were the ones begging for mercy. What happens when the world realizes the burden they mocked was the miracle they needed all along? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The grand ballroom of the Miracle Foundation sparkled under crystal chandeliers, their light catching on champagne glasses and designer jewelry. Dorian Hale adjusted his perfectly pressed tie, a rare flutter of nervousness in his usually steady hands. The familiar weight of expectation pressed down on his shoulders as he stood in the wings of the stage. But tonight felt different. His gaze drifted to where Mika Daniels stood with her children, a quiet dignity more striking than any of the expensive gowns in the room. Earlier that day, when Elena Brooks had introduced them at the non-profit's offices, he'd been caught off guard by Mika's gentle strength. Now, watching her smooth Ava's hair and squeeze David's hand reassuringly, Dorian felt more certain than ever about what he was about to do. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, "please welcome Miracle Company's Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Dorian Hale." Camera flashes erupted as Dorian walked to the podium. He could see his board members in the front row, their faces expectant. They thought this would be another standard announcement about quarterly earnings or a new technological breakthrough. "Good evening," he began, his deep voice carrying across the hushed room. "Tonight, I'm here to share something personal." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Several reporters leaned forward in their seats. "Today, I met someone extraordinary. Someone who reminded me that success isn't measured by stock prices or market share, but by the lives we touch and the love we share." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dorian had never spoken like this before. His public persona was all facts, figures, and carefully measured statements. "I'm pleased to announce my engagement to Mika Daniels," he continued, his voice warming as he looked at her. "She and her 5 wonderful children will be joining our Miracle Company family." The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Phones appeared everywhere, recording the moment. In the front row, several board members exchanged alarmed glances. But Dorian's attention was fixed on Mika and her children. Naomi stood tall beside her mother, chin raised despite the whispers around them. The twins, Jordan and Janai, held hands, their usual mischievous grins replaced by solemn expressions. Little Ava pressed closer to Mika's side, while David watched the lights dance across the ceiling, his fingers moving in familiar patterns. "I know this may come as a surprise," Dorian continued, his voice steady and clear. "But sometimes the most miraculous things in life are unexpected. Thank you for your attention this evening." As he stepped down from the stage, the room erupted in chaos. Questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Hale, is this a publicity stunt? How long have you known Ms. Daniels? What about company shareholders? Are you concerned about market reaction?" Dorian moved through the crowd with purpose, his tall frame creating a path toward Mika and her children. When he reached them, he placed a protective hand on Mika's back. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. Mika nodded, gathering her children close. Naomi helped shepherd the twins, while Dorian lifted David into his arms. The boy's weight felt natural against his chest, and David's fingers curled into Dorian's expensive suit jacket without hesitation. They moved as a unit toward the elevator, photographers trailing behind them like persistent shadows. The questions continued, becoming more pointed and personal. Miss Daniels, were you aware of Mr. Hale's net worth when you met? What about the children's father? How will this affect Miracle Company's image? Dorian pressed the elevator button, positioning himself between the cameras and the family. He noticed how Ava's shoulders trembled slightly, how Jordan and Janae's usual chatter had gone quiet, how Naomi's jaw was set in a determined line. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and they stepped inside. As the doors closed, blocking out the chaos, they all seemed to exhale at once. The descent was silent except for David's gentle humming and the soft rustle of Mika's dress. When they emerged in the lobby, their footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Security personnel kept the press at bay as they made their way to the entrance. The glass doors opened, letting in a rush of cool evening air that carried the scent of approaching rain. They paused just outside, standing close together under the building's overhang. The city lights twinkled around them, and distant traffic created a steady background hum. Dorian turned to Mika, taking in her face in the soft glow of the entrance lights. Despite everything, she looked composed, though he could see the emotion in her eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's going to be a storm coming." Mika drew in a deep breath, her hand finding his in the darkness. When she spoke, her voice carried both trembling and steel. "I've weathered worse." Her words hung in the evening air, a quiet declaration of strength that made Dorian's heart tighten in his chest. He squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers intertwined with his, knowing that together they would face whatever came next. The morning sun crept through the small kitchen window of Mika's apartment, casting warm patches of light across the worn linoleum floor. Dorian stood at the stove, his usually impeccable suit replaced by a casual button-down shirt and slacks. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but determination showed in every careful movement as he flipped pancakes with focused precision. Behind him, 5 pairs of eyes watched his every move. The twins, Jordan and Janae, whispered and giggled from their seats at the kitchen table. Naomi leaned against the counter, her phone temporarily forgotten as she observed this strange new addition to their morning routine. Little Ava sat quietly, legs swinging beneath her chair, while David arranged his cereal pieces with methodical care. "I hope everyone likes blueberry pancakes," Dorian said, trying to keep his voice light despite his nerves. He'd never cooked for children before, rarely cooked at all, if he was honest. But he'd spent hours watching cooking videos on his phone last night, determined to get this right. "Mom usually just gives us cereal," Jordan piped up. "Because Mom has to get 5 kids ready for school," Naomi reminded him, a protective edge in her voice. Dorian turned from the stove, a fresh stack of slightly misshapen pancakes on a plate. "Well, today we're trying something different." He placed the plate in the center of the table, noticing how David hadn't touched his cereal, instead creating intricate patterns with the round pieces. Curiosity drew him to kneel beside David's chair. The boy's fingers moved with purpose, creating geometric shapes that seemed to follow some internal logic. "What are these shapes, David?" Dorian asked softly, careful to maintain a respectful distance. David's hands paused briefly. Without looking up, he spoke in a quiet, measured voice. "They're conversations I hear that don't make sense yet." His fingers resumed their work, adjusting a piece of cereal slightly to the left. Mika appeared in the doorway then, already dressed for work in her nurse's scrubs. Her eyes softened at the sight of Dorian kneeling beside her son. "David sees patterns in everything," she explained, moving to pour herself coffee. "Sometimes in ways the rest of us can't understand." The morning routine unfolded with organized chaos as everyone prepared for school. Dorian watched in amazement as Mika orchestrated the symphony of backpacks, lunchboxes, and last-minute permission slips. When she announced it was time to leave, he straightened his shoulders, ready to face what waited outside. They hadn't made it halfway down the block before the first camera flash went off. Suddenly, they were surrounded by paparazzi, their shouted questions cutting through the morning air. "Mr. Hale, why the sudden engagement? Ms. Daniels, how did you meet? What do the shareholders think about this?" Dorian instinctively moved to shield the children, his arm wrapping protectively around Ava as she pressed against his side. Mika grabbed the twins' hands, while Naomi guided David, who had his hands pressed against his ears. "No questions," Dorian stated firmly, his CEO voice emerging. "These are children heading to school. Show some respect." But the cameras kept flashing, the questions growing more pointed and personal. How much is the prenup worth? What about the children's father? Is this a publicity stunt for Miracle Company? They managed to reach the school, where security finally held the photographers at bay. Dorian's heart ached as he watched the children hurry inside, their shoulders tense. Only David lingered, his hand trailing patterns on the brick wall before Mika gently guided him through the door. The day passed in a blur of emergency meetings and damage control. By evening, when they all gathered around Mika's small dining table, the internet was ablaze with opinions. Naomi scrolled through her phone, her expression darkening. "They're being horrible," she said, her voice tight. "Look at what they're saying about Mom." Dorian reached over and gently lowered her phone. "Those people don't know your mother," he said firmly. "Or this family." But the words were already out there, spreading like poison through social media. Dorian Hale has lost his mind. Gold digger with 5 kids. She'll destroy Miracle Company. Who would want that burden? Mika stood suddenly, gathering plates with steady hands. "Words only have the power we give them," she said, but Dorian could hear the hurt beneath her strength. After dinner, while Mika helped Ava with homework, and the twins argued over video game turns, Dorian sat in the living room trying to draft a press statement. The couch dipped slightly as David appeared beside him, silent as a shadow. In his hands, he held a worn notebook. With careful movements, David placed the notebook in Dorian's lap. The pages were filled with intricate patterns, circles, lines, and shapes flowing together in complex arrangements. Some seemed to pulse with an almost mathematical precision, while others flowed like visual music. Dorian stared at the patterns, recognition slowly dawning in his mind. These weren't random drawings. They were communication systems, emotional landscapes translated into visual language. He looked at David, who watched him with quiet intensity, and found himself completely speechless. The notebook trembled slightly in his hands as understanding washed over him. This wasn't just a child's drawings. This was David inviting him into his world, showing him how he saw the conversations and connections that surrounded them all. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle chaos of family life, with David's notebook heavy with trust in his, Hans Dorian Hale, the man known for always having the right words, found himself in stunned silence. The kitchen was quiet that night, lit only by the soft glow above the sink. Most of the family had gone to bed, but David sat at the table with his notebook open, fingers tracing the intricate patterns he'd drawn. Dorian pulled up a chair beside him, tie loosened after the long day, his usual corporate polish softened by genuine curiosity. "Can you tell me about these?" Dorian asked softly, pointing to a spiral pattern that seemed to flow across the page. David's eyes remained fixed on his drawings as he spoke. "This is how Mom sounds when she's happy but trying not to show it," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "See how the lines get lighter here? That's when she's holding back a smile. Dorian leaned closer, fascinated. On the next page, angry red lines cut across gentle curves. And this one? That's from the playground, when kids say nice words but mean mean things. David's finger followed the harsh angles. The shapes show what they really mean. As David continued explaining, Dorian's analytical mind began racing. Each pattern was a precise visual representation of human communication, not just the words, but the complex layers of emotion, intention, and unspoken meaning beneath them. David wasn't just drawing pictures, he was creating sophisticated data visualizations of human interaction. "This is amazing, David," Dorian said, careful to keep his voice calm despite his growing excitement. "You can see all of this in how people talk?" David nodded, turning to a new page filled with interconnected circles. "Everyone has patterns. Most people don't notice them." He paused, glancing briefly at Dorian. "Yours are very straight, except when you look at Mom. Then they get soft around the edges." Mika appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a worn robe. "David, honey, it's getting late." 5 more minutes?" Dorian asked, surprising himself with how much he wanted to keep learning from this remarkable child. Mika smiled and nodded, understanding in her eyes. The next morning, after a chaotic family breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs, Dorian arrived at his office clutching David's notebook. His mind was full of possibilities, but before he could even reach his desk, his assistant intercepted him with a worried look. "The board members are waiting in the conference room, sir. They're concerned." Dorian found 6 stern faces around the mahogany table, all wearing expressions that ranged from disapproval to barely concealed anger. Thomas Bradford, the senior board member, spoke first. "This engagement announcement, Dorian, it's already affecting stock prices. You need to reconsider." "Reconsider?" Dorian's voice was ice cold. "I wasn't aware my personal life required board approval. A single mother of 5 children, one with special needs." Another board member, Janet Pierce, cut in. "The optics alone will tank the company. Investors are nervous." Dorian placed David's notebook carefully on the table, his hands steady despite his rising anger. "My fiancée is a registered nurse who has raised 5 exceptional children while working full-time. She represents exactly the kind of determination and capability our company claims to value." "We're hearing whispers," Bradford pressed. "Major investors preparing to pull out. Your reputation for logical decision-making is what built this company. Now people are questioning your judgment." The meeting dragged on, filled with thinly veiled threats and dire predictions. By the time Dorian left the office that afternoon, his shoulders were tight with tension. But as he climbed the stairs to Mika's apartment, the sound of children's laughter drifted down, and something in his chest loosened. He found David waiting by the door, rocking slightly on his feet. "Did you understand the patterns?" the boy asked immediately, hope bright in his eyes. Dorian knelt down to David's level, the day's corporate battles falling away. "I did, and I think they're incredible. Would it be okay if I studied them some more?" David's whole face lit up, and he nodded enthusiastically before hurrying to get his spare notebook. Later that night, after the apartment had settled into sleep, Dorian sat at the kitchen table with both of David's notebooks open before him. His own notebook was filled with sketches and ideas, flowing diagrams that showed how David's visual language could be translated into communication software, something revolutionary that could help people understand each other better, bridge the gaps between different ways of thinking. His pen moved quickly across the paper, drawing connections, making notes. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice Mika watching from the doorway until she spoke. "You really see him, don't you?" Her voice was soft, full of wonder. Dorian looked up, his eyes bright with possibility. He's brilliant, Mika. The way he perceives communication, it's like nothing I've ever seen. This could change everything. She moved to stand behind him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder as she looked at his notes. Just be careful, she said quietly. People have tried to use his gifts before, and it never ends well. I promise, Dorian said firmly, covering her hand with his own. This is about helping him share his brilliance with the world, on his own terms. In their plush offices across town, unbeknownst to Dorian, members of the Miracle Company legal team were already gathering, their computers glowing late into the night as they crafted strategies to protect corporate interests, no matter the cost to this unexpected new family. The morning sun filtered through worn curtains as Mika moved around her small kitchen, the sizzle of pancakes on the griddle filling the air with a sweet, homey scent. Dorian sat at the kitchen table, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, watching the organized chaos of a family morning unfold around him. "Mom, have you seen my history book?" Naomi called from down the hall. "Check under your bed, sweetie." Mika flipped a perfectly golden pancake while helping Ava tie her shoelaces. The twins, Jordan and Janai, raced through the kitchen, nearly colliding with David, who was carefully arranging his backpack contents in a precise order that made sense only to him. Dorian felt the tension from yesterday's board meeting slowly melting away. Here, in this warm kitchen with its mismatched chairs and crayon drawings on the fridge, corporate politics seemed distant and unimportant. "Would you like another pancake?" Mika asked, her smile gentle as she noticed his empty plate. "Please," he said, realizing he was actually hungry for the first time in days. "These are incredible. Mom makes the best pancakes," Ava declared solemnly, maple syrup dotting her chin. The drive to school was filled with kid chatter and pop music from the radio. Dorian found himself relaxing into the rhythm of it all, exchanging knowing looks with Mika in the rearview mirror as the children debated the merits of different superhero powers. After drop-off, though, reality crashed back as he drove to Miracle Company headquarters. The board meeting loomed ahead, and his briefcase felt heavy with David's notebooks and his own late-night sketches. The conference room was already full when he arrived, faces both familiar and wary around the long table. Dorian took a deep breath, remembering David's quiet confidence when explaining his patterns. "Before we begin the regular agenda," he said, standing at the head of the table, "I'd like to share something that could revolutionize how we approach communication technology." He began laying out papers, explaining the concept of pattern-based communication, inspired by David's unique way of perceiving conversations. Imagine software that could analyze not just words, but emotional patterns, subtle shifts in tone, the layers of meaning we often miss. Initially, he saw the skepticism he expected: raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, a few poorly hidden smirks. But as he continued, showing examples of David's intricate drawings and how they could be translated into actionable data, the atmosphere in the room shifted. This is extraordinary," muttered Dr. Chen, their head of research and development, leaning forward to study the patterns. The applications could be endless, from improving AI responses to helping people with communication difficulties. "The market potential is significant," added Sarah Martinez, their chief financial officer, her calculator already in hand. "If we could patent this approach—" Dorian felt a surge of pride, both for David's brilliance and for having recognized its value. But then he caught whispered comments between board members. "Remarkable work, but can we trust him to lead this? His judgment lately has been questionable. Too much personal drama." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of budget discussions and quarterly projections, but Dorian could feel the undercurrent of doubt. These people who had once respected his every decision were now watching him like he was a liability. That evening, he couldn't wait to share the news with Mika. The kids were doing homework in their rooms when he explained how the board had recognized the potential in David's work. But instead of excitement, he saw worry cross Mika's face. She set down the dish she was drying and turned to face him fully. "Dorian," she said softly, her voice carrying years of protective maternal instinct. "I need you to understand something. David isn't just gifted, he's vulnerable. His whole world can be thrown off balance by the smallest change in routine. And he's been hurt before, by people who claimed they wanted to help, but really just wanted to use his abilities for their own gain." She moved closer, her eyes intense. "These are my children. They've already been through so much. I can't let them, especially David, become some corporate experiment." Dorian reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. "Mika, I swear to you, I will protect them. Protect all of you. This isn't about exploitation. It's about helping David share his gift with the world, on his own terms." He kissed her forehead tenderly, feeling her lean into his embrace. "You and the children are my family now. Nothing matters more than keeping you safe." But even as he spoke the words with complete sincerity, across town in the Miracle Company executive offices, lights burned late into the night. Behind closed doors, conversations were happening about risk management, about protecting company interests, about the potential liability of a CEO whose personal choices might compromise their biggest breakthrough in years. The shadows of corporate ambition were gathering, threatening the delicate balance of trust and love that Dorian and Mika were building. But for now, in their small apartment filled with homework and dinner dishes and children's laughter, they held on to their moment of peace. The weekend had been a gentle reprieve. Dorian had savored every moment with the Daniels family, helping David with his pattern work, watching movies with the twins sprawled across the couch, and seeing Ava slowly begin to trust him enough to share her favorite books. Even Naomi had started to warm up to him, asking thoughtful questions about his work while they prepared Sunday dinner together. But Monday morning brought a harsh return to reality. Dorian arrived at Miracle Company headquarters early, his mind still filled with peaceful weekend memories. The lobby felt different somehow. Conversations stopped as he passed, replaced by whispers and sidelong glances. When he reached his office, his assistant Jennifer was waiting, her face pale. "Sir, there's something you need to see." She handed him a tablet, opened to a business news website. The headline hit him like a physical blow. Miracle CEO's judgment questioned, leaked board memo reveals concerns over financial liability of CEO's new family. His hands shook as he scrolled through the article. The leaked memo detailed board discussions about Mika and her children, referring to them as significant financial burdens, and questioning whether Dorian's emotional attachment to this situation has compromised his ability to lead effectively. Worse were the comments below the article. Anonymous users spewed racist vitriol, calling Mika a calculating gold digger and making crude remarks about her 5 dependents. Some suggested she had trapped him, while others questioned her motives as a single mother. Dorian's phone buzzed, a text from Mika. His heart sank as he read, "Need to go to the kids' school. Naomi and the twins are having a rough day. Call when you can." He called immediately, stepping into a private conference room. Mika answered on the first ring, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "What happened?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Some kids showed their parents the news articles," Mika explained quietly. "They've been taunting them all morning, called Naomi a gold digger's daughter. The twins got into a fight defending her." Dorian closed his eyes, rage building in his chest. "Are they okay?" "They're shaken up. I'm heading there now. Jordan has a split lip, and Janne won't stop crying. Naomi's trying to be strong, but Mika's voice cracked slightly. I know how to handle this kind of thing. We've dealt with it before, but they shouldn't have to. No, they shouldn't. Dorian agreed, his voice hard. I'm going to fix this. He ended the call and strode toward the main conference room, where he knew the board was gathering for their morning meeting. His assistant called after him. Sir, they specifically said not to disturb. He pushed open the heavy doors, interrupting the conversation inside. 12 faces turned to look at him, some surprised, others carefully blank. Would anyone care to explain? He said, his voice dangerously quiet. Why my family is being discussed in leaked memos as a liability? Board Chairman Richard Matthews cleared his throat. Dorian, this is neither the time nor the place. It's exactly the time and place. Dorian cut him off. Right now, 3 children are being bullied at school because someone in this room decided to leak private discussions to the press. My fiancé is being slandered online, and I want to know why. The board has legitimate concerns. Sarah Martinez spoke up. Your recent decisions. My recent decisions include identifying revolutionary technology that could transform this company's future. Dorian interrupted. Technology that came from one of those children you're so concerned about. That's precisely the point, Matthews said. We can't tie the company's future to an unstable personal situation. The market doesn't like uncertainty, Dorian. You know this. Unstable? Dorian's laugh was bitter. I've found a brilliant, loving family that makes me better both as a person and a leader. How is that unstable? Matthews sighed, sharing glances with other board members. We've come to a decision, Dorian. Either end this engagement and maintain professional distance from the Daniels family, or resign as CEO. The room fell silent. Dorian looked at each face around the table. People he'd worked with for years, people he'd trusted. Now they were asking him to choose between his position and his heart. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. With deliberate movements, he typed out a quick email, then held up the screen so they could see. To the Board of Directors, I hereby resign my position as Chief Executive Officer of Miracle Company, effective immediately. His voice was steady. I won't work with people who would ask me to abandon my family for profit. He turned and walked out, ignoring their calls for him to wait, to discuss, to reconsider. His mind was already on his next destination. Mika's apartment. The sun was setting when he arrived, casting long shadows through the living room windows. He found Mika in the kitchen, making hot chocolate, a comfort remedy for difficult days. The children were in the adjacent room. He could hear their murmured conversations. She looked up as he entered, immediately reading his expression. What happened? Dorian pulled the printed copy of his resignation letter from his briefcase and placed it on the kitchen table. Mika's eyes widened as she read it. Dorian, she whispered, reaching for his hands. They were trembling, he realized, as her warm fingers wrapped around his. From the doorway came small gasps. The children had gathered, watching. Naomi's face showed understanding beyond her years. Jordan's split lip was set in a determined line, and Jana's eyes were red from crying. David stood slightly apart, his fingers moving in familiar patterns at his sides, while Ava clung to her older sister's hand. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Mika's living room as the family gathered the next morning. The children sat in a circle on the worn carpet, their faces reflecting varying degrees of concern. Dorian perched somewhat awkwardly on the edge of the couch, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt. Mika stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug. I know things seem scary right now, she began, her voice gentle but firm. But we're going to be okay. We've handled changes before. Are we going to be poor? Iva asked quietly, hugging her stuffed rabbit closer. Dorian leaned forward, meeting the little girl's worried eyes. "No, sweetheart. I have savings, and your mum is still working. We just need to be more careful with money for a while." Mika nodded, taking a seat beside him. "My cousin Marcus has that rental house on Oak Street. It's smaller than this apartment, but it's in a good neighborhood near your school. He's offering us a fair rate." "But all my friends are in this building," Janne protested, her bottom lip trembling. Jordan nudged his twin sister. "You can still see them at school, dummy." "Don't call your sister dummy," Mika corrected automatically. "And yes, you'll still see your friends. Oak Street is only 15 minutes away." Naomi, ever practical, was already making lists on her phone. "When do we need to move out?" "The lease here ends in 2 weeks," Mika explained. "Marcus says we can move in whenever we're ready." David, who had been silent throughout the conversation, suddenly stood up and disappeared into his room. He returned moments later with his worn sketchbook, pressing it into Dorian's hands. The pages were filled with intricate geometric patterns, somehow both ordered and organic. "These are about moving," David said softly, his fingers tracing the lines. "See, everything changes but stays connected." Dorian studied the patterns, amazed once again by the boy's unique way of processing the world. "You're right, David. We're all still connected, even in a new place." The next few days passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and packing tape. Dorian threw himself into the physical labor, finding an odd comfort in the methodical work of dismantling furniture and wrapping dishes in newspaper. His expensive suits hung forgotten in garment bags as he adopted a uniform of jeans and t-shirts. The rental house on Oak Street was indeed modest, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a small front yard. But it had character, with built-in bookshelves and a kitchen window that caught the morning light. Dorian hired movers for the heavy furniture, but insisted on handling the personal items himself, wanting to show the family he wasn't afraid of hard work. "The twins can share this room," Mika directed, pointing to a space upstairs. "Naomi and Ava can take the bigger one, and David needs the quiet room at the end of the hall." Dorian wiped sweat from his forehead, setting down another box of books. "Where should we put your desk?" "Oh, I usually just work at the kitchen table," Mika said with a shrug. "Not anymore," Dorian insisted. "You need a proper workspace for your writing." Throughout the moving process, David remained Dorian's constant companion, watching intently as the former CEO assembled IKEA furniture and installed closet organizers. The boy rarely spoke, but his presence was comforting, a reminder of why Dorian had walked away from his corporate life. One evening, as Dorian sat cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by instruction manuals and scattered screws, David settled beside him. The boy opened his sketchbook to a new page, revealing fresh patterns more complex than any Dorian had seen before. "This one helps people understand each other," David murmured, pointing to a spiral design that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Dorian leaned closer, his tired mind suddenly alert. The pattern wasn't just beautiful, it was a sophisticated visual representation of human communication. Each line represented tone, each curve captured emotion, and the overall structure mapped the flow of conversation in a way that felt startlingly intuitive. "David," he breathed, "this is incredible. You've created a universal language of emotion." The boy nodded, pleased that Dorian understood. "People talk in patterns. Most don't see them, but I do." Mika watched from the doorway as her son and fiancé bent their heads together over the sketchbook, lost in their own world of shapes and meanings. She smiled, remembering all the specialists who had dismissed David's drawings as mere repetitive behavior. Dorian looked up, his eyes bright with purpose. "Mika, we need to set up a workspace here, a real one." He spent the next hour rearranging the living room furniture, creating a corner office with a borrowed desk and his laptop. As the children headed to bed, he sat down and began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "What are you doing?" Mika asked, bringing him a cup of tea. Dorian looked up, determination written across his features. "If the company wouldn't hear me, the world will. David's patterns aren't just drawings, they're the foundation for a completely new way of understanding human communication, and I'm going to help him share it with everyone." The tea grew cold as Dorian worked into the night, translating David's visual language into digital form. In the quiet house, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the echoes of children's laughter, he felt more alive than he ever had in his sleek corporate office. Mika watched him work, her heart full of both hope and worry. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but seeing Dorian fight for her son's vision with such passion made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could create something extraordinary together. The makeshift workspace looked out of place in their modest living room, a former CEO's command center wedged between a second-hand couch and the kids' toy box. But somehow, it felt right. This wasn't about corporate success anymore. It was about family, understanding, and the brilliant mind of a little boy who saw the world in patterns. The gentle hum of Dorian's laptop filled the makeshift office corner of their new living room. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns across his workspace as his fingers flew over the keyboard. He had been working for hours, translating David's intricate drawings into digital frameworks. "Here's your coffee," Mika said softly, placing a steaming mug beside him. She peered at the screen, where complex diagrams and code filled multiple windows. "How's it coming along?" Dorian rubbed his tired eyes. "It's fascinating. David's patterns aren't just random drawings. They're a complete system for understanding human communication. Look at this one." Pointed to a spiral design that branched into delicate tendrils. Each line represents a different emotional tone in conversation. The way they interconnect, it's brilliant. Mika smiled, remembering countless meetings with school administrators who had dismissed David's abilities. You know, at his last school, they wanted to ban him from drawing during class, said it was disruptive behavior. They never bothered to understand what the patterns meant to him. "Tell me more about that," Dorian said, reaching for his notepad. "What challenges did you face advocating for him?" As Mika shared her experiences, Dorian took detailed notes. Her stories about fighting for accommodations and explaining David's needs to teachers gave him valuable insights into making the software more accessible. They spent the morning adding features that would help users with different processing styles. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Their new street was nothing like Dorian's old gated community, but it had its own charm. Children rode bikes on the sidewalk, and neighbors tended small garden plots. The twins, Jordan and Janae, had already made friends with kids next door, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Robinson from the local church stood on the porch, holding a covered casserole dish. "Thought you folks could use a hot meal," she said warmly. "Moving is hungry work." Over the past week, a steady stream of Mika's church friends had appeared with food and encouragement. Their kindness touched Dorian deeply. It was so different from the calculated networking of his corporate world. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table enjoying Mrs. Robinson's chicken casserole, Naomi pushed her food around her plate, unusually quiet. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mika asked. Naomi's lower lip trembled. "Some girls at school today. They saw that article about us online. They said we're just using Dorian for his money." She wiped away an angry tear. "But now we have even less than before. We moved to a smaller house and everything." Dorian set down his fork and turned to face her fully. Naomi, listen to me. Those girls don't know anything about our family or what really matters. True dignity isn't found in big houses or bank accounts. It comes from who you are inside. But everyone's talking about us, she whispered. Let them talk, Dorian said firmly. What matters is that we know the truth. We're building something important here, something that could help people like David all over the world. That's worth more than any mansion or corporate title. Mika reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. Remember what Grandma always says, other people's opinions are none of our business. After dinner, while Mika helped Ava with her bath and the twins cleaned up the kitchen, David appeared at Dorian's desk. Without a word, he placed a new drawing on top of the keyboard. Dorian studied it carefully. The pattern was different from the others, more fluid, with subtle variations in line weight and spacing. As he examined it, understanding dawned. This shows how emotions change the way people speak, doesn't it? The thick lines for anger, the light ones for happiness. David nodded, pleased. It helps understand when people say one thing but mean another. Dorian's heart raced as he began translating the pattern into code. This could be the breakthrough they needed, a way for the software to recognize emotional undertones in communication. Hours later, long after the children had gone to bed, Dorian sat back in his chair, staring at the screen in amazement. The basic framework was there, a program that could potentially revolutionize how people understand each other. It combined David's intuitive pattern recognition with advanced natural language processing, creating something entirely new. Mika appeared beside him, wrapped in her robe. You should get some sleep, she said softly. Look at this, he whispered, pulling her closer. What David created, it's not just a communication tool, it's a bridge between different ways of seeing the world. This could change everything. She leaned down to study the screen, where David's patterns had been transformed into elegant digital interfaces. My boy always saw things differently, she said proudly. I just never imagined his gift could help so many people. The house was quiet now, filled only with the soft sounds of sleeping children and the hum of Dorian's laptop. Outside, crickets chirped in the small backyard, and a cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine through the window. In this modest home, far from the gleaming corporate towers where he'd once ruled, Dorian felt a deep sense of purpose. They were building something revolutionary, not just in code and algorithms, but in understanding and compassion. 2 days after their initial breakthrough, Dorian sat nervously in the office of Elena Brooks, director of the Communication Access Initiative. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, illuminating walls covered with artwork created by children with disabilities. His laptop was open on the desk between them, displaying the prototype he and David had created. I've always admired Miracle Company's innovation, Elena said, adjusting her glasses. But I have to admit, I was skeptical when you called. After everything in the news, I understand, Dorian replied, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. But this isn't about Miracle Company anymore. This is about something much more important. He launched the program, and David's patterns came to life on the screen, transformed into a sleek interface. Elena leaned forward, her professional detachment giving way to genuine interest as Dorian demonstrated how the system translated emotional patterns into clear communication pathways. This is extraordinary, she breathed, studying the flowing lines and subtle color variations. The way it maps emotional undertones to visual patterns, I've never seen anything like it. My fiancé's son David created the original concept, Dorian explained proudly. He sees communication differently than most people. We just helped translate his vision into something others can use. Elena's eyes widened. Would you consider letting us test this with some of our families? We work with several nonverbal children who've struggled with traditional communication methods. That's exactly why we developed it, Dorian said, feeling a surge of hope. When would you like to start? Meanwhile, across town, Mika navigated morning traffic in their old minivan, glancing in the rearview mirror at her children. David sat quietly in the back, drawing in his ever-present notebook. The twins argued good-naturedly about a science project, while Naomi helped Ava practice spelling words. "Mom," Ava called out, "how do you spell beautiful?" "Sound it out, sweetheart," Mika encouraged, turning onto the school's street. "Remember what we practiced?" As she dropped each child off at their respective buildings, Mika felt a familiar mix of pride and anxiety. The media attention had died down somewhat, but she still worried about how others treated her children. Yet each day, they showed such resilience, such grace under pressure. That evening, as the family gathered around their small dining table, steam rose from a pot of Mika's famous spaghetti. Dorian could barely contain his excitement as he shared the day's news. Elena was amazed by the prototype, he explained, passing the garlic bread to Jordan. She thinks it could help hundreds of families in their program alone. When will they test it? Mika asked, serving Ava an extra meatball. Tomorrow morning, Dorian replied. They have a 14-year-old boy who's never been able to express his emotions clearly. His parents are hoping this might help. David looked up from his careful arrangement of spaghetti strands. Will he see the patterns like I do? That's what we're going to find out, buddy, Dorian said softly. The next morning dawned bright and clear. In a comfortable testing room at the non-profit's center, Dorian set up the prototype while Elena spoke quietly with Marcus, the 14-year-old boy, and his parents. The boy's fingers twitched nervously as he sat before the computer. Take your time, Elena said gently. There's no pressure here. Marcus studied the screen, where David's patterns flowed like a visual symphony. His hands hovered over the interface, then slowly began to move. The room fell silent as patterns began forming, translating his thoughts and feelings into clear, emotionally nuanced communication. I feel scared sometimes, appeared on the screen, but also happy, and I wish I could tell you how much I love you. His mother gasped, tears streaming down her face. His father gripped the back of her chair, speechless. Marcus kept going, years of pent-up thoughts and feelings flowing through the pattern system. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Thank you, his mother whispered, hugging Marcus tight. Thank you for giving our son a voice. That evening, the Daniels Hale family sprawled across their living room floor, surrounded by empty pizza boxes. The twins had convinced everyone to try pineapple pizza, leading to a lively debate about acceptable toppings. Laughter filled the modest home as they celebrated the day's success. To David's patterns, Dorian raised his soda can in a toast, and to Marcus, who proved they work. David, who had been quietly observing the celebration, climbed onto Dorian's lap, something he'd never done before. The room hushed as he looked up at Dorian with serious eyes. It works, he whispered, because you listened. The simple truth in those words struck Dorian deeply. He'd spent years in corporate boardrooms, but it took a child's wisdom to show him what really mattered. He hugged David close, feeling the boy relax against him, while Mika watched them with shining eyes. The pizza boxes lay forgotten as the family sat together, bound by love and the shared joy of helping others find their voice. Through the window, stars began appearing in the darkening sky, witnesses to a different kind of success than Dorian had ever known in his corporate life. the success of truly making a difference. Word spread like a gentle ripple through the disability advocacy community. It started with hushed conversations between therapists, then expanded into excited phone calls between parents who had spent years searching for ways to help their children communicate. Within 7 days, Dorian's email inbox filled with heartfelt requests from families, each one hoping this new software might change their loved one's life. Dr. Sarah Chen, a speech therapist specializing in autism support, reached out first. "I have 3 clients who could benefit immensely from this program," she wrote. "Would you consider allowing us to test it?" Dorian shared the email with Mika over breakfast while the children got ready for school. She smiled, watching David methodically arrange his cereal in perfect geometric patterns. "What do you think, sweetheart?" she asked him. "Would you be okay with other children using your patterns?" David looked up, his fingers still moving pieces of cereal. "Will it help them talk to their mums and dads?" "Yes," Dorian answered softly. "Just like it helped Marcus." David nodded slowly. "Then it's okay." The testing sessions began that afternoon. A 7-year-old girl named Lucy, who had never spoken a word, used the patterns to tell her mother she loved strawberry ice cream. An elderly man recovering from a stroke communicated his frustration with physical therapy, leading to a breakthrough in his treatment plan. At church that Sunday, Miss Betty, who had brought countless casseroles during their move, pulled Mika aside after service. "My sister Martha had that terrible stroke last year," she whispered. "Do you think that program of yours might help her? She gets so frustrated when we can't understand what she needs." Mika squeezed the older woman's hand. "I'll talk to Dorian about it," she promised. Each success story strengthened their resolve. They kept a journal of testimonials, not for publicity, but as a reminder of why they were doing this. The twins, Jordan and Janai, took turns reading the stories aloud during dinner, while Naomi helped compile them into a digital folder. But not everything was proceeding smoothly. In the gleaming offices of Miracle Company, executives monitored their former CEO's online activities with growing concern. They tracked his website visits, noted his communications with disability advocacy groups, and watched as his new project gained attention in specialized forums. "He's developing something," Margaret Walsh, head of legal affairs, told the board, "and based on the timing, it might be connected to his work here." Unknown to Dorian and his family, teams of lawyers began combing through his old contracts, searching for clauses about intellectual property and non-compete agreements. One sunny afternoon, while Mika helped Ava with her homework, her phone rang. The caller identified herself as Rachel Martinez from the Tech Chronicle. "Mrs. Daniels, we're doing a feature on corporate transitions and family dynamics. Would you be willing to share your perspective on life after Miracle Company? Our readers are particularly interested in how your children have adjusted." Mika's hand tightened on the phone. "I appreciate your interest," she replied firmly. "But we're focusing on our family's privacy right now. The children need stability, not publicity." "But surely the public has a right to know." "The public has a right to respect our boundaries," Mika interrupted gently. "Thank you for understanding." She ended the call and took a deep breath, reminding herself of what truly mattered. That evening, as the family prepared dinner together, Dorian learning to make Mika's grandmother's cornbread recipe while the twins set the table, he noticed David sitting alone in the corner of the living room. The boy's notebook lay unopened in his lap, his usual enthusiasm for pattern drawing notably absent. Dorian wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and walked over, sitting cross-legged beside him. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Everything okay?" David didn't look up, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the notebook's cover. The silence stretched between them, comfortable, but heavy with unspoken worry. What if they take my conversations? David finally whispered, so quietly Dorian had to lean closer to hear. What if they make them wrong? Dorian's heart clenched, understanding the deep fear behind those simple words. David wasn't just worried about losing his patterns. He was afraid of losing his voice, his way of making sense of the world. Listen to me, Dorian said, gently turning to face David. Your patterns, your conversations, they come from in here. He tapped David's chest, right over his heart. Nobody can take that away, not ever. I promise you that. But what if they try? Then they'll have to get through me first, Dorian said firmly. And your mom, and Naomi, and the twins, and Ava. We're a family. We protect each other. David looked up then, his eyes meeting Dorian's. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Like a fortress? Exactly like a fortress, Dorian agreed. The strongest kind. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room. Ava chose their favorite show about baby animals, and they squeezed together on the worn but comfortable couch. David sat between Dorian and Mika, his notebook open again, occasionally drawing patterns that matched the gentle rhythms of their laughter. Naomi spread a blanket across everyone's laps, while Jordan and Janae argued good-naturedly about who got the last cookie. The TV cast a soft glow across their faces as they watched baby penguins learn to swim, the simple joy of being together healing the day's worries. In their cozy living room, surrounded by love and warmth, they remained unaware of the storm gathering in Miracle Company's legal department. Teams of lawyers worked late into the night, preparing documents and strategies, their computer screens casting harsh shadows across stacks of contracts and corporate regulations. But for now, in their home, there was only the sound of family. Ava's delighted giggles at the baby animals, the twins' playful bickering, Naomi's quiet humming, and David's pencil scratching new patterns into his notebook. Mika leaned her head against Dorian's shoulder, feeling grateful for these precious moments of peace. The community center buzzed with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the worn linoleum floors where nearly 100 people sat in folding chairs. Parents clutched hands with non-verbal children. Caregivers accompanied elderly stroke survivors. Speech therapists and special education teachers lined the walls, notebooks ready. Dorian stood at the front of the room, his usual corporate polish softened by days of working from home and helping with school runs. He wore a simple blue button-down shirt rather than his familiar designer suits. Mika sat in the front row with the children, David's hand firmly in hers. What you're about to see, Dorian began, his voice steady but humble, isn't just technology. It's a bridge between different ways of understanding each other. He gestured to a large screen behind him. And I want to be clear, this wouldn't exist without the brilliant mind of an 8-year-old boy who sees patterns in human communication that most of us miss completely. David ducked his head, but Mika could see the proud smile tugging at his lips. The demonstration began with simple examples, showing how the program translated emotional patterns into clear visual signals. The audience leaned forward as Dorian explained how it could help people who struggled with traditional communication methods. We have a volunteer, Dorian said, who's agreed to try the system today. He nodded toward the side of the room where Marcus Chen sat in his wheelchair. The 65-year-old former English teacher had suffered a severe stroke 2 years earlier, leaving him unable to speak. His daughter Sarah, a young woman in her 20s, stood beside him, nervously adjusting her glasses. Marcus's weathered hands shook slightly as Dorian helped him position the tablet. The room fell silent. Sarah knelt beside her father's wheelchair, her eyes bright with hope and fear. The program activated, its interface glowing softly. Marcus touched the screen, his fingers moving through patterns that David had first drawn in his notebook. Colors shifted, shapes flowed, and then words appeared. "My precious daughter." The computer voice spoke, clear and gentle. "Every day I've wanted to tell you." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus continued working with the tablet, his movements becoming more confident. "How proud I am of you. How much I love you. How much I miss our talks about books and poetry. I love you, my beautiful girl." Sarah burst into tears, wrapping her arms around her father. Throughout the room, people wiped their eyes. Mika squeezed David's hand, and he squeezed back, his face glowing with quiet joy. The demonstration continued for another hour, with more volunteers trying the system. Each success brought fresh tears and hugs. David watched it all, occasionally drawing new patterns in his notebook when he saw something that could make the program even better. As people filed out afterward, many stopped to thank Dorian and ask when the software would be widely available. Parents of non-verbal children shared stories of years of frustration, now replaced with hope. Speech therapists requested trial versions for their clinics. "This will change lives," one elderly woman said, gripping Dorian's hand. "Bless you for creating it." "The credit goes to my stepson," Dorian replied, looking at David with pride. "He showed me the way." The family drove home together, tired but happy. They ordered pizza to celebrate, and even David ate in the living room, a special treat usually reserved for movie nights. The joy of the afternoon still hummed through their home like a gentle current. Then Dorian's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting another message from the community center. Instead, his face went pale. "Dorian?" Mika asked, setting down her pizza. "What's wrong?" He stared at the screen, his hands starting to shake. "It's from Miracle Company's legal department." The children grew quiet. Even the twins stopped their usual playful bickering. Dorian read the message, each word falling like ice into the warm family moment. "They're claiming ownership of the software," he said finally. "They say because I conceived it while employed there, it belongs to them. They're threatening to sue if we don't cease all development and hand over all materials." "But that's not true," Naomi protested. "David made the patterns. We all saw him." Dorian's phone buzzed again. They've released a press statement." His voice cracked. "They're saying David's involvement is fiction, that I'm using a child for publicity. They're calling it a manufactured story to generate sympathy." Mika's hands began to tremble. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pulled out her own phone, seeing the story already spreading across social media. Comments ranged from skeptical to cruel, with many accusing them of exploiting David's autism for attention. David stood up slowly, his pizza untouched. Without a word, he walked to his room. The sound of his door closing echoed through the sudden silence. Ava started crying softly. The twins huddled together on the couch, their earlier joy evaporated. Naomi moved to comfort her little sister, but her own eyes were bright with angry tears. The family sat around the dinner table, the half-eaten pizza growing cold. Mika wiped her eyes with a napkin, trying to stay strong for her children, but feeling overwhelmed by the cruelty of it all. Dorian stared at his phone, his face a mask of shock and rage. From down the hall, they could hear David opening his dresser drawers. He was gathering up his notebooks, the source of all his patterns, all his beautiful ways of seeing the world. Then came the sound of paper being crumpled. Mika moved to stand up, to go to him, but stopped when they heard the thud of notebooks being thrown into his trash can. David, who had spent years expressing himself through those patterns, was choosing silence instead. The family remained at the table, stunned and heartbroken as the evening darkness crept in around them. No one spoke. No one needed to. The weight of what had been stolen from them, not just the software, but David's trust in sharing his gift with the world, sat heavy in the air between them. The morning sun struggled to brighten the kitchen as Mika made breakfast, her movements mechanical and distracted. The usual morning chaos was replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press against the walls. Even the twins, Jordan and Janai, picked at their cereal without their usual playful banter. Dorian sat at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he reviewed the legal documents one more time. His laptop displayed an email from attorney Patrick Cole confirming their 9 o'clock meeting. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward the hour. "I made you some toast," Mika said softly, placing a plate beside him. Her eyes were shadowed from another sleepless night. "Thank you," Dorian replied, though he couldn't imagine eating. His stomach was tied in knots of worry and anger. David's empty chair at the table seemed to mock them. For the first time since moving in together, he had refused to come out for breakfast, staying curled up in his bed despite Mika's gentle coaxing. At 8:45, Dorian gathered his files and stood up. Mika stepped close, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "Whatever the lawyer says," she whispered, "we'll face it together." The legal aid office was a modest building downtown, nothing like the gleaming towers where Dorian had once worked. Attorney Patrick Cole's office was small but orderly, with degrees on the wall and well-worn law books lining the shelves. "I've reviewed the initial filing," Patrick said, adjusting his reading glasses as he spread the papers across his desk. "Miracle Company isn't wasting any time. They're seeking an immediate injunction to stop all development and demonstrations of the software." Dorian leaned forward in his chair. "But they have no right to it. The concept came entirely from David's patterns." Patrick's expression was grave. "The problem is their employment contract. It contained a clause stating that any intellectual property conceived during your employment belongs to them, even if developed after hours. But I didn't conceive it then." Dorian protested. "I only saw the potential of David's patterns after I resigned." "Can you prove that?" Patrick asked quietly. "With concrete evidence?" Dorian's silence was answer enough. "They have deep pockets," Patrick continued, removing his glasses to clean them thoughtfully. "They can drag this out for years. Their legal team will argue that you had access to company resources and expertise while employed there, which influenced the development. So they can just steal a child's work." Dorian's voice cracked with frustration. "They can erase David's contribution and claim it as their own." Patrick's eyes softened with sympathy. "Not if we can prove the software's true origins. We need every sketch, every note, every email that shows David's patterns came first. We need to establish a clear timeline." Back at home that afternoon, the mood had grown even heavier. David remained in his room, emerging only for bathroom breaks and returning without a word. Mika tried to coax him to eat lunch, but he just shook his head. Naomi and the twins tried their best to help. They knocked on his door with his favorite snacks and books, but the offerings remained untouched in the hallway. Even 5-year-old Ava's drawings, slipped under his door with hopeful messages, stayed where they fell. "He won't even look at his notebooks anymore," Naomi told Dorian quietly as they cleared the dinner dishes that evening. "I've never seen him like this." After the children went to bed, Dorian sat alone at the dining table, his head in his hands. The house creaked and settled around him in the darkness. He had promised this family protection and stability. Instead, he had brought them nothing but pain and legal threats. Tears began to fall between his fingers. All his corporate success, his years of building, power and influence meant nothing now. He couldn't even protect a child's right to his own ideas. A small sound made him look up. David stood in the doorway in his pajamas, his bare feet silent on the floor. In the dim light from the street, his face was solemn and tired. Dorian quickly wiped his eyes. "Hey, buddy, can't sleep?" David padded closer until he stood right beside Dorian's chair. For a long moment he was quiet, his fingers twisting the hem of his pajama top. Then, in a whisper so soft Dorian had to lean in to hear, he said, "Don't let them take my conversations." The simple plea hit Dorian like a physical blow. He turned in his chair to face David fully, placing his hands gently on the boy's shoulders. "I won't," he promised, his voice fierce with renewed determination. "I won't let them take anything from you." David's dark eyes studied Dorian's face, searching for truth. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, because he gave a small nod before turning and padding back to his room. Dorian sat very still for several minutes after David left, his mind racing. Then he stood up abruptly and began to move with purpose. He retrieved a large cardboard box from the garage and labeled it Evidence in bold black letters. Starting in the living room, he gathered every loose sketch of David's he could find, carefully noting the dates on sticky notes. He collected emails from his laptop showing correspondence about the software's development, printing them with their timestamps clearly visible. In the kitchen, he found more of David's drawings tucked into cookbooks where Mika had saved them. He added these to the box, along with notes from teachers and therapists describing David's unique way of processing communication. As the night deepened, Dorian continued his mission with methodical focus. Every scrap of paper, every digital file, every piece of proof that showed the true origin of the patterns went into the box. He would not let Miracle Company erase David's contribution. He would not let them steal the voice this brilliant, gentle boy had given to so many others. The box filled steadily as Dorian worked through the night. Each item was a piece of armor in the battle ahead. Each time stamp and signature another weapon in their arsenal of truth. By the time the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, the box was full, not just of evidence, but of hope. Over the next 48 hours, Dorian's dining room transformed into a makeshift legal headquarters. Papers covered every surface as attorney Patrick Cole sat with them, reviewing documents and building their defense strategy. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced above stacks of testimonials and patent laws. "The key is establishing clear ownership," Patrick explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "We need to prove beyond doubt that these patterns originated with David, before any Miracle Company involvement." Dorian nodded, spreading out a timeline he'd created. "I have everything documented from the first day David showed me his notebook. Every sketch, every conversation." "Good," Patrick said. "But we need more. We need voices from the community, people who've seen this technology change lives." Mika had already started gathering those voices. She spent hours on the phone, talking to parents whose children had used the prototype. Each conversation brought tears to her eyes as mothers and fathers described breakthrough moments. "My Tommy spoke his first full sentence using your program," one mother told her, voice trembling. "He looked at me and said, 'I love you, Mommy. I'll testify anywhere, anytime.'" The support grew beyond families. Members from Mika's church began showing up with casseroles and offers to help. Ms. Rose, the elderly choir director, brought her famous sweet potato pie and a determined spirit. "Those corporate vultures won't know what hit them," she declared, setting the pie on the counter. "I've already written down everything I saw when that Johnson boy used the program at youth group. First time that child was able to tell us what he was thinking. It was a miracle, a real one, not their company kind." But while the community rallied, Miracle Company launched their attack. It started with subtle implications in business newsletters questioning Dorian's judgment. Then came the televised interviews with anonymous sources claiming he'd shown erratic behavior before his resignation. The worst came in a prime-time news segment that portrayed Mika as a calculating gold digger who had ensnared a vulnerable CEO. The reporter made pointed references to her 5 dependents and suspicious timing. Dorian found Mika crying in the kitchen after that broadcast, trying to hide her tears from the children. "They're trying to make me ashamed of my babies," she whispered as he held her, "trying to make our love sound dirty." "Their words can't touch what we have," Dorian said firmly. "The truth is stronger than their lies." The children felt the pressure too. Naomi started wearing headphones to block out whispers at school. The twins grew quieter, less likely to joke and play. Little Ava clung to her mother more than usual. But it was David who worried them most. He spent hours in his room, door closed, refusing to touch his art supplies. The patterns that had once flowed so naturally from his mind seemed locked away behind walls of fear and hurt. Then came the turning point. It happened after dinner on the second night, as Dorian helped clear the table. David appeared in the doorway, clutching his sketchbook, the first time he'd held it in days. The family watched, barely breathing, as he sat down at the table and opened to a fresh page. His hand moved with purpose, creating lines and shapes unlike anything they'd seen before. The pattern was more complex, more intricate than his previous work. "What is it, sweetheart?" Mika asked softly. David didn't look up from his drawing, but his voice was clear. "It shows arguments and truth. See how the lies make jagged lines? But truth flows smooth, like water." Dorian leaned closer, studying the pattern with growing excitement. "David, this is incredible. You're mapping how different types of communication interact, showing how false statements create discord, while truth creates harmony." The boy nodded, adding another careful line. "The bad people make angry shapes when they talk about us, but our shapes are strong together." Patrick, who had stayed late reviewing documents, came to look. His eyes widened. This could be crucial evidence. It shows not only David's original contribution, but his continuing development of the concept. The timing is perfect, right before the hearing. The patent hearing. The words hung in the air, heavy with importance. In just days, they would face Miracle Company's legal team, fighting for David's right to his own ideas. That evening, after the younger children were in bed, the family gathered in the living room. Mika sat on the couch with David curled against her side, his sketchbook hugged to his chest. Naomi perched on the arm of Dorian's chair, while the twins sat cross-legged on the floor. "Let's pray," Mika said softly. It wasn't a suggestion, but a necessity, as natural as breathing. They joined hands, forming a circle of connection. Even David, who usually struggled with physical touch, reached out to hold his mother's hand and Jane's. Mika's voice rose, strong and clear in the quiet room. "Lord, we thank you for bringing us together as a family. We thank you for David's beautiful mind and the gift you've given him to help others. We ask for strength in the days ahead, for wisdom in the hearing, and for truth to shine through all the darkness. Amen." They whispered together, hands still linked. In that moment, they weren't a former CEO, a single mother, and 5 children facing a corporate giant. They were simply a family, bound by love and faith, standing together against injustice. The next morning would bring more preparation, more strategies, more battles to face. But for now, they had this moment of peace, their circle unbroken, their hearts beating as one. David's new pattern lay on the coffee table, its flowing lines a testament to truth's enduring power. Tomorrow they would use it to fight. Tonight they would pray and hold each other and remember what they were fighting for. The morning sunlight filtered through worn curtains as Mika buttoned Ava's dress with trembling fingers. She had chosen their outfits with special care, clean, pressed clothes that spoke of dignity rather than wealth. Naomi wore her navy blazer, the twins matched in crisp white shirts, and little Ava's hair was neatly braided. David stood quietly by the mirror in his best sweater, watching his mother's reflection as she moved from child to child. In the living room, Dorian paced, his normally steady voice wavering as he practiced his testimony. The familiar corporate confidence had been replaced by something more vulnerable, the voice of a father protecting his family. "Remember," Mika called softly from the doorway, "just tell the truth. That's all we need." The courthouse loomed before them, all granite and glass. Camera flashes erupted as their family climbed the steps, Dorian and Mika shielding the children between them. Inside, the wood-paneled hearing room felt heavy with tension. Miracle Company's legal team sat like a wall of dark suits, laptops open, expressions cold. Their lead attorney, Ms. Harrison, stood as soon as the judge entered, eager to draw first blood. "Your Honor," she began, her voice precise as a scalpel. "Mr. Hale's claims about the origin of this software are, frankly, absurd. The basic concepts were clearly developed during his tenure as CEO, using company resources." She produced emails, meeting minutes, old product proposals. Mr. Hale's attempt to attribute this technology to an 8-year-old child is both desperate and exploitative. Dorian's hands clenched under the table. Beside him, David sat very still, his notebook clutched to his chest like armor. But then the witnesses began to speak. Dr. Sarah Chen, a speech therapist, described how the software's pattern recognition exactly matched David's unique way of processing communication. "I've worked with hundreds of neurodivergent children," she testified. "This system doesn't just help them, it thinks like them, like David." Marcus Rodriguez, father of a non-verbal teenager, spoke next. "My daughter couldn't tell me she loved me for 15 years, he said, voice breaking. "Using this program, based on David's patterns, she finally could. That's not corporate technology. That's a gift from one special child to others like him." More parents came forward, more therapists, each testimony built upon the last, creating a mountain of evidence that pointed to one truth. This was David's vision, translated through Dorian's technical knowledge and Mika's understanding of her son's needs. Ms. Harrison grew increasingly aggressive, her questions sharp enough to make witnesses flinch. "Isn't it convenient," she suggested, "that this alleged child prodigy just happened to create exactly what Miracle Company was already developing?" That's when Dorian stood. He didn't look at his prepared notes or the stack of legal documents. Instead, he looked at David. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I spent 20 years at Miracle Company trying to innovate communication technology. We made faster phones, clearer video calls, better messaging apps, but we never once thought to ask, how do people who think differently experience communication itself?" He walked to the evidence table, picking up one of David's original sketches. "David showed me that for him, every conversation is a pattern. Emotions create shapes. Truth has a different texture than lies. He doesn't just see communication, he understands its architecture." The room had grown very still. Even Ms. Harrison seemed caught by the sincerity in Dorian's voice. "I didn't create this software," Dorian continued. "I simply helped translate David's brilliant mind into computer code. Every feature, every interface element comes from his patterns. And I can prove it." That's when David moved. Without speaking, without being prompted, he stood from his chair. The notebook he'd been holding, his very first one, filled with the original patterns, was clutched in his small hands. Mika caught her breath as David walked forward. He rarely approached strangers willingly, rarely put himself at the center of attention. But now he moved with quiet purpose to the judge's bench. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes behind stern glasses, leaned forward as David opened the notebook. Page after page of intricate patterns spread before her, the raw, pure source of what would become revolutionary software. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the court reporter's fingers had stilled on her keyboard. They all watched as the judge studied the patterns, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something like wonder. When she finally looked up, her voice was slightly unsteady. "I am calling for a formal evidentiary review," she announced. "These materials—" She paused, looking again at David's notebook. "These materials require thorough examination." David turned away from the bench, walking back to his family with steady steps. Mika reached for him, and he let himself be held, his face pressed against her shoulder. Dorian's hand came to rest protectively on the boy's back. The judge was still speaking, setting dates and procedures, but the heart of the matter had already been decided in that moment of silence, when truth, expressed through a child's pure vision, had cut through all the corporate noise. The notebook lay open on the judge's bench, its patterns a testament to David's unique brilliance and the power of seeing the world through different eyes. The shift in public opinion began like a gentle wave that grew into a tsunami. Social media, which had been so cruel just days before, now overflowed with touching videos of families using David's communication patterns to connect with their loved ones. A mother in Seattle shared footage of her teenage son, who hadn't spoken in 12 years, using the software to tell her about his dreams. The video went viral overnight, gathering millions of views and shares. Comments flooded in. "This is what real innovation looks like. That corporate giant tried to steal from a child. Shame on them. David Daniels is a hero to special needs families everywhere." Morning shows picked up the story, running segments that highlighted how David's unique way of seeing communication had revolutionized the field. Tech blogs that had previously mocked Dorian's mid-life crisis now praised his courage in standing up to miracle, company, and recognizing genius in unexpected places. Mika's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Former critics, including some who had written particularly nasty articles about her, sent carefully worded apologies. She read them with quiet dignity, responding graciously but keeping her guard up. The memory of their cruelty was still fresh. "Mom," Naomi said one evening, scrolling through her phone. "They're calling David a visionary." Mika smiled softly, watching David and Dorian at the dining room table, heads bent together over the latest version of the software. "He always was," she replied. "The world just needed time to see it." In the week leading up to the final hearing, Dorian and David worked tirelessly to refine the program. David's patterns had evolved, becoming even more sophisticated. He could now map not just emotional tones, but complex social dynamics, helping users navigate group conversations and understand subtle social cues. "Look at this," Dorian said one afternoon, calling Mika over to the computer. On screen, a demonstration showed how the software could translate a business meeting's undercurrents into visual patterns. Power dynamics, hidden agendas, genuine collaboration all became visible through David's unique lens. "It's beautiful," Mika whispered, squeezing David's shoulder. Her son beamed, a rare, full smile lighting up his face. The twins, Jordan and Jana, took to practicing their presentations for the judge. "David's patterns are like magic," Jordan would declare dramatically in the living room. "They help people understand each other." Little Ava, usually shy, made cards for everyone involved in the case, drawing her own version of David's patterns in crayon. "For understanding," she wrote carefully on each one. The morning of the final hearing arrived crisp and clear. Mika woke early to press everyone's clothes and make a proper breakfast, though nervous excitement made it hard for anyone to eat. They gathered in the living room, a family circle, hands joined. "Whatever happens today," Dorian said, looking at each face in turn, "we already won because we stood together for truth." David, wearing his best blue sweater, nodded solemnly. He carried his latest notebook, filled with even more advanced patterns he'd created specifically for the demonstration. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters. Families who had benefited from the software stood holding signs. "Thank you, David," and "Innovation comes from the heart, not the boardroom." News cameras rolled as the family walked in, hands linked in a chain of unity. Inside the courtroom, Dorian took the stand one final time. His testimony wasn't filled with technical jargon or legal arguments. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "When I first met David," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I was a man who measured success in profit margins and market share. I thought I knew what innovation meant." He paused, looking at David. "But this remarkable 8-year-old boy showed me that true innovation comes from seeing the world differently and having the courage to share that vision." The room was completely silent as Dorian continued. David doesn't just see patterns. He sees the architecture of human connection. He understood something that all our corporate research missed. Communication isn't just about transferring information. It's about bridging the gaps between different ways of experiencing the world. Tears shone in his eyes as he looked directly at David. "I am honored to have helped bring your vision to life, son, and I am even more honored to be your father." David, who usually avoided eye contact, met Dorian's gaze and held it. A silent moment of perfect understanding passed between them. The judge, who had reviewed mountains of evidence over the past week, including testimonials from experts worldwide, leaned forward at her bench. Her decision, when it came, was clear and firm. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds that the intellectual property in question originated from David Daniels' unique perception of communication patterns, developed after Mr. Hale's resignation from Miracle Company. The patent rights are hereby awarded jointly to Dorian Hale and David Daniels. Miracle Company is ordered to cease all claims to this technology and issue a public retraction of their allegations. The gavel hadn't even finished echoing when the courtroom erupted in applause. People stood, cheering and wiping tears. Mika pulled David into a tight embrace as Naomi, the twins, and Ava piled on. Dorian wrapped his arms around all of them, his family, united in victory. Through the noise and celebration, David tugged at Dorian's sleeve. When Dorian knelt down, David showed him a new pattern in his notebook, one that clearly represented joy, love, and family. It was the most beautiful pattern yet. The applause continued, washing over them like a wave of validation and support. But the real triumph was in that quiet moment between father and son, in the pattern that showed what they'd known all along. Some truths don't need words to be understood. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the newly established Communication Access Foundation's headquarters. What had started as a simple idea in their modest rental home had blossomed into something extraordinary. The Foundation's mission statement, written in both traditional text and David's pattern language, adorned the lobby wall. Bridging minds, connecting hearts, one pattern at a time. Dorian stood at his office window, watching families arrive for their morning sessions. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from former Miracle Company investors, each more desperate than the last. "Think about your future," one text read. "The company needs your leadership." He smiled and tucked the phone away. His future was right here, helping people find their voices. "Dad," Naomi's voice carried from down the hall. She burst into his office, waving a paper. "I got an A+ on my science presentation." Her eyes sparkled with pride. The same girl who had once hidden from bullies now stood tall, confident in who she was and where she belonged. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Dorian pulled her into a hug. "Your mother will be so proud." In the Foundation's youth center, Jordan and Janai had become unofficial ambassadors for the robotics club they'd joined. The twins used David's patterns to help program simple robots that could respond to emotional cues. Their enthusiasm was contagious, drawing other children into their world of innovation and discovery. "Look what our robot can do," Jordan demonstrated to a group of visiting parents. The small machine traced out one of David's basic patterns in light. "It's showing happiness," Janai explained, beaming. "We're teaching it to understand feelings." Down the hall, music drifted from the recreational therapy room. Ivor, once too shy to leave Mika's side, now twirled gracefully in her ballet shoes. Dance had become her own special way of expressing the patterns she saw in the world. Her instructor had even incorporated some of David's visual concepts into the choreography. "Beautiful, Ava!" Mika called from the doorway, her heart swelling as she watched her youngest daughter shine. In the pattern development lab, David sat surrounded by tablets and screens, his fingers dancing across surfaces as he refined and expanded his communication system. As the Foundation's chief pattern officer, a title that never failed to make him smile, he worked alongside researchers and developers who treated his insights with genuine respect. "David." A stroke survivor named George approached his desk. "That new emotion mapping pattern you created helped me tell my granddaughter about her art show." "Thank you." David nodded, his eyes bright with understanding. The Foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams. Donations flowed in from every corner of the globe, from tech billionaires impressed by the innovation to ordinary families whose lives had been transformed by the technology. Each contribution came with a story. An elderly woman reconnecting with her family despite advancing dementia, a non-verbal child sharing jokes with classmates for the first time, a trauma survivor finding new ways to express their journey toward healing. That evening, the family gathered in their living room, now comfortably furnished but still modest. The national news program they'd been anticipating was about to air. Mika had prepared special snacks, and everyone settled into their usual spots. The twins sprawled on the floor, Naomi curled up in the armchair, Ava snuggled between Mika and Dorian on the couch, and David sitting cross-legged on his favorite cushion. The segment opened with sweeping shots of the Foundation's building, then cut to interviews with families whose lives had been changed by the pattern-based communication system. The reporter's voice carried clear authority and warmth. "In an age of technological breakthroughs, the most revolutionary communication tool of our time came not from a Silicon Valley giant, but from the unique perspective of an 8-year-old boy." The camera panned to David's workspace, showing his original notebooks alongside the sophisticated systems they had inspired. David Daniels sees the world in patterns. The reporter continued. What others might dismiss as simple drawings, he recognized as the fundamental architecture of human connection. His gift has opened new pathways for millions who struggle to make themselves understood. They showed clips of David working with the development team, his quiet focus evident as he refined the patterns. The segment included interviews with experts who explained how his system had revolutionized everything from autism therapy to elder care. "This child," the reporter concluded, "has quite literally changed the way the world communicates. And he did it by showing us that sometimes the most profound messages don't need words at all." As the segment ended, all eyes turned to David. He sat very still for a moment, then slowly, beautifully, smiled, a full, radiant expression that lit up his entire face. It was a smile they hadn't seen in weeks, not since the stress of the legal battle. "That's my boy," Dorian said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Micah felt tears welling up as she looked at her children, Naomi, so grown up and strong, Jordan and Janai bubbling with creativity and joy, Ava finally blooming in her own quiet way. And David, her brilliant, beautiful son who had taught them all to see the world differently. She opened her arms wide, and as if drawn by magnetic force, All 5 children moved toward her. Even the teenagers didn't hesitate to join the group hug. Mika held them close, her tears falling freely now, but they were tears of pure joy. "I'm so proud of all of you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "So very proud." In that warm embrace, surrounded by the love of her family, Mika felt the patterns of their connection, invisible but absolutely real, flowing between them like streams of light, binding them together in perfect understanding. The old church glowed with late afternoon sunlight, streaming through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. It seemed fitting that their story would come full circle here, in the very place where Mika had first found strength as a single mother, where the congregation had embraced her family through years of struggle. Dorian stood at the altar, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. The nervous gesture felt different from his countless corporate presentations. This wasn't about impressing investors or securing deals. This was about celebrating the love that had transformed his life. He gazed across the packed church, marveling at the diverse gathering. Church members who had brought casseroles during their hardest days sat beside tech executives who had once doubted him. Parents of children helped by their communication software wiped away tears of joy. Former critics who had written scathing articles now smiled warmly, their perspectives changed by witnessing the power of love and innovation combined. The soft organ music shifted, and the church doors opened. Dorian's breath caught in his throat as he watched his family enter. The twins, Jordan and Janne, stepped forward first, their matching outfits coordinated in the foundation's signature colors. Naomi followed, carrying herself with the confidence of a young woman who had learned that her worth wasn't determined by others' judgment. Little Ava practically danced down the aisle, her joy impossible to contain. Then came David, moving with careful purpose, the ring pillow held steady in his hands. He had practiced this moment for weeks, determined to get it perfect. The sunlight caught the simple gold bands, symbols of commitment that meant so much more than their monetary value. And finally, Mika. She wore a cream-colored dress that seemed to glow in the church light, but it was her smile that illuminated the space. Their 5 children surrounded her as she walked, a living testament to the family they had become. Dorian felt tears welling up, remembering how that first meeting at the charity gala had changed everything. As Mika reached the altar, David presented the rings with careful precision, then took his place beside his siblings. The pastor, who had supported Mika through years of single motherhood, began the ceremony with words about love's power to transform and heal. When these 2 souls first joined their paths, he said, his voice warm and strong, many doubted, many questioned, but God's love shows us that the heart's wisdom often exceeds human understanding. Dorian took Mika's hands in his, marveling at their strength and gentleness. "Mika," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you and your children showed me what real success looks like. It's not in quarterly reports or stock prices. It's in morning pancakes and homework help and goodbye kisses. It's in watching David change the world with his beautiful mind. It's in hearing the twins laugh and seeing Naomi stand tall and watching Ava dance. You didn't just give me a family, you gave me a soul." Mika squeezed his hands, tears streaming freely down her face. "Dorian," she responded, "you saw us, really saw us, when so many looked away. You chose love over power, family over fortune, and truth over convenience. You became not just my partner, but a father who shows our children daily what integrity looks like. You helped David share his gift with the world, and you taught all of us that sometimes the biggest miracles come in the smallest moments." They exchanged rings, the gold bands sliding home like they had always belonged there. The pastor pronounced them renewed in their vows, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The family walked together into the sunlit courtyard, where rose petals drifted on the warm breeze. Well-wishers surrounded them, elderly patients who could now communicate with their grandchildren, parents of non-verbal children who had found their voices through David's patterns, colleagues who had stood by them during the legal battle. Dorian pulled Mika close, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the roses. "They said I was crazy for loving you and your children," he whispered in her ear. "But loving you was the only sane thing I ever did." She laughed softly, pressing closer to him as their children danced around them in the falling petals. Later, as they drove home together, the windows down and the warm air rushing in, the car filled with the sound of family. Naomi humming along to the radio, the twins debating their latest robotics project, Ava giggling at something David had drawn. Mika reached over and squeezed Dorian's hand where it rested on the steering wheel. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, but the real light was inside their car, in the love and laughter they shared. In the future they would build together. They had weathered the storms, faced down the critics, and emerged stronger. Now they drove toward home, toward tomorrow, toward all the beautiful patterns yet to be discovered. The laughter of their children carried on the breeze, a symphony of joy, a promise of brighter days ahead. They were more than just a family now. They were proof that love, when given room to grow, could change not just lives but the whole world. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.